Swedish defense firm Saab wants Canada to buy and build its fighter jets. The firm is pitching a partnership with Bombardier and promising to create up to 10,000 jobs along.
The company that makes the Gripen has told CTV News that 10,000 manufacturing and research jobs could land in Canada if Ottawa adds the Swedish fighter jet to its military fleet.
In Canada, to do their own upgrades, to build parts of it, to do final assembly and tests. We, as Saab, we are prepared to do that technology transfer to Canada and support that build.
The fighter jet decision was never expected to spiral into an international confrontation. Canada entered the process assuming it would finalize a purchase, modernize its aging fleet, and move forward without drama, treating the upgrade as another routine step inside long-standing defense cooperation. Instead, what began as a technical procurement quickly triggered warnings from the Pentagon, raised serious concerns within NATO, and pushed Ottawa into a position it had not been forced to occupy in generations. Once Sweden's Gripen entered serious consideration, Washington's posture hardened, and Canada responded in ways few allies ever dare, revealing a deeper conflict over sovereignty, operational control, and the future of air power that now threatens to reshape alliance politics far beyond North America. Everything about this was supposed to be predictable. Canada would retire its CF-18S, finalize paperwork for the F-35, and continue along the familiar path shaped by decades of American-led defense integration. The entire process had been framed as procedural, a carefully managed transition wrapped in standard bureaucracy and technical evaluations. Yet behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. As Canadian officials began treating Sweden's JAS-39 Gripen as a legitimate alternative, Pentagon representatives moved away from diplomatic language and began delivering pointed warnings through private channels. These were not statements meant for public consumption or media briefings. They were messages designed to carry weight, delivered quietly but unmistakably. The implication was clear. Selecting the Gripen would bring consequences. Ottawa did not retreat. The review process continued without pause, and Canada made its position unmistakable in terms rarely spoken aloud by close U.S. allies. Canadian leaders made clear that air sovereignty would remain under national control. That declaration reverberated through Washington. The tension surrounding this decision had nothing to do with doubts over the F-35's technical capability, which remains one of the most advanced fighter platforms in existence. Nor did it signal any intention to distance Canada from NATO or its partnership with the United States, both of which remain central to Canadian defense policy. What transformed this into a flashpoint was precedent. A core U.S. defense partner was openly challenging how modern alliances distribute power and refusing to follow expectations set over decades. On the surface, Sweden's Gripen should not have triggered alarm. The aircraft already operates with Sweden, Hungary, Brazil, and the Czech Republic, nations that either belong to NATO or maintain close ties with Western security structures. It has proven itself operationally, integrates with NATO systems, and was designed for demanding environments. Yet the Pentagon responded as though something far more destabilizing was underway, because the Gripen represents something Washington has spent years trying to contain: independence. Unlike the F-35, the Gripen does not depend on American-controlled software infrastructure. It does not require U.S. authorization to integrate weapons systems. Mission data remains under national authority. Operational software is managed domestically, and once delivered, the aircraft belongs entirely to the country operating it. That reality disrupts a model the United States has refined since the end of the Cold War, where Allied air forces maintain surface-level sovereignty while remaining operationally dependent beneath it. Software updates, electronic warfare databases, mission planning tools, and sustainment networks all flow through American-managed systems, creating unprecedented integration while concentrating control in a single center of gravity. The Gripen sits outside that architecture. If Canada demonstrates that a modern air force can retain authority over its own software, data, and upgrades while remaining interoperable with allies, then other nations gain proof that alternatives exist. That possibility weighs heavily on Pentagon planners. Defense insiders have said officials warned Ottawa about intelligence sharing, interoperability challenges, and joint operational effectiveness, Yet behind those technical arguments lay a more uncomfortable concern. A Canadian Gripen fleet could encourage others to reconsider long-standing dependence on U.S. platforms, including countries like Finland, Norway, and future NATO members. The anxiety was never about radar performance. It was about momentum. Canada's strategic reality makes this choice particularly consequential. The country defends the second-largest airspace on the planet, much of it stretching across remote northern regions where infrastructure is limited and weather conditions remain extreme. Arctic patrols are not abstract exercises. Russian bomber activity near Canadian approaches has increased. Polar routes are becoming strategically critical, and response time carries greater importance than laboratory performance metrics. Canada does not project air power across deserts. Canada safeguards frozen skies, and that distinction reshapes operational priorities entirely. Aircraft operating in Arctic conditions must start reliably in severe cold, cover vast distances, land on short or damaged runways, and remain functional when supply chains come under strain. Peak performance under ideal circumstances matters little if availability collapses during sustained harsh weather. The Gripen was built around these realities. Sweden designed it with the expectation that airbases would be targeted early, command networks disrupted, and centralized planning degraded. Gripen pilots trained to operate from highways and improvised landing zones, while ground crews can refuel and rearm aircraft rapidly using minimal equipment. Small teams keep the jets operational without reliance on massive infrastructure, following a doctrine centered on survival through dispersion. The F-35 reflects a fundamentally different operational philosophy. It excels through deep system integration, advanced maintenance facilities, and continuous digital connectivity. Its stealth characteristics and sensor fusion capabilities remain unmatched, yet they depend heavily on uninterrupted support networks. In high-intensity conflict, adversaries prioritize satellites, data links, fuel depots, and runways, meaning dependency quickly transforms into vulnerability. This reality does not undermine the F-35's strengths, but it exposes the assumptions built into its design. The Gripen assumes those assumptions fail early, prioritizing availability over complexity and resilience over centralized precision, an approach that becomes decisive when bases are damaged and networks degraded. This realization marked a turning point inside Canada's internal deliberations, shifting the conversation from procurement toward long-term strategy. Modern NATO doctrine increasingly recognizes that fixed airbases no longer offer guaranteed protection. Concentrating aircraft at pristine facilities improves efficiency but weakens survivability. Distributed operations spread risk, allowing smaller detachments, multiple launch points, and rapid relocation to absorb shocks while maintaining operational tempo. The Gripen aligns naturally with this model. Its ability to operate from roads and remote strips makes air power harder to neutralize, ensuring command structures remain functional without becoming single points of failure. High-end platforms benefit from this resilience rather than being isolated by it. This debate was never about replacing advanced fighters. It was about preserving them. Washington understands this shift, which explains why the issue escalated beyond aircraft specifications. Soon afterward came a pointed warning. The United States indicated it could increase American fighter operations inside Canadian airspace if Ottawa reduced or canceled its F-35 purchase. Under NORAD, both nations already possess authority to cross borders to intercept threats, a framework built on mutual trust since the Cold War. Yet, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra made clear that a smaller Canadian fleet would force operational changes, potentially requiring NORAD restructuring. Speaking to CBC News, Hoekstra stated that Canada's plan to acquire 88 F-35s directly impacts continental defense and that any reduction would require the United States to compensate. His remarks arrived as Ottawa reviewed the F-35 contract after projected costs rose by approximately $8 billion over 3 years. Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a reassessment, questioning whether the investment still aligned with Canada's economic and security priorities, especially as relations with Washington grew strained under tariff threats from President Donald Trump. At the same time, Sweden's Saab presented an alternative vision built around local manufacturing, technology transfer, and the creation of 12,600 Canadian jobs. This unfolded against a broader backdrop of political pressure, as President Donald Trump had recently threatened tariffs against European allies over unrelated disputes, reinforcing perceptions that defense cooperation now operates within a wider framework of economic coercion. Canada faced an uncomfortable question. How closely should national security remain tied to systems controlled beyond its borders? The F-35 provides elite stealth, advanced sensors, and seamless integration with U.S. command networks, but it also places Canada inside an ecosystem managed by Washington, where software updates, mission data, sustainment, and upgrades remain American-controlled. That reality creates long-term strategic dependence and introduces political exposure, particularly during periods of uncertainty in U.S. domestic leadership. The Gripen presents a different balance through lower operating costs, full national authority over software and weapons integration, stronger domestic industrial participation, and operational flexibility, though choosing it would limit access to certain NATO capabilities and complicate coalition planning. Neither option offers perfection. Scaling back the F-35 would strain relations with Washington and force NORAD to adapt while potentially leaving capability gaps during rising Arctic tension. Continuing with the F-35 delivers unmatched performance while deepening dependency. Even with a non-US fighter, Canada remains embedded in an American-led sensor and command environment, making full autonomy under NORAD unattainable. Yet autonomy exists on a spectrum, and degrees matter. Canada's position does not reject cooperation. It reframes it. Ottawa made clear this stance is not anti-American, but reflects a move toward post-dependence, where alliances function as partnerships rather than hierarchies, and cooperation does not require surrendering operational authority. That message carried far beyond Canada's borders. What unsettled Washington was not the aircraft itself, but Canada's refusal to comply quietly. This debate exposed deeper dynamics within NATO, where fighter programs have shaped alliance behavior for decades, by linking data access, upgrades, and operational decisions to a single power center. When Canada questioned that structure, the response became political. The warnings were never about combat radius or radar performance, they centered on precedent. If Canada proves that independence can coexist with interoperability, the influence model shifts. Other nations are watching closely, not to see which jet Canada selects, but to observe how Canada resists pressure. This moment points toward a future where alliances must be negotiated rather than assumed, and where sovereignty carries equal weight with solidarity, which explains why this story matters far beyond Ottawa. At its core, Canada's hesitation comes down to trust, because neither option offers a perfect outcome. The F-35 brings unmatched technological power while placing critical systems under external control, while the Gripen provides operational sovereignty at the cost of reduced integration with certain NATO capabilities. Ottawa now faces a decision that reaches far beyond procurement, weighing how much independence can be preserved inside an alliance built on shared infrastructure. What stands out is how deeply this moment cuts into the foundations of modern defense, exposing who truly holds authority over software, data, upgrades, and ultimately the skies themselves when national security hangs in the balance. Canada's stance has already peeled back a quiet reality inside NATO, where cooperation has slowly merged into reliance, and where technology choices continue shaping political behavior long after contracts are signed. Fighter programs have evolved into instruments of influence, binding allies through digital pipelines, software permissions, and upgrade schedules that quietly centralize power. When Ottawa resisted, Washington reacted because the challenge was structural, not technical. A close partner showed that the system could be questioned without unraveling, and that alone shifted the balance of expectations across the alliance. Subscribing helps the channel grow, helps these stories reach more people, and ensures you stay informed as these developments continue unfolding. See you in the next one.